U.S. authorities claim the latest WikiLeaks dump puts U.S. national security at risk, a target list for al-Qaeda. Some of the sensitive locations revealed: pipelines, ports, and research facilities.
And our next guest, a diplomatic veteran, knows the importance of classified cables. Back in 2003, he found himself in the center of a leak controversy. After accusing the Bush administration of twisting intelligence to launch the Iraq War, his wife, Valerie Plame, was outed as a CIA agent. A new movie, Fair Game, chronicled the entire episode. Former Ambassador Joe Wilson, welcome.
Thanks. Good to be with you.
Are these documents uniquely dangerous to us, to our interests?
Well, I think they're probably dangerous to our interests and to the interests of our allies, and they're dangerous to every country that may be mentioned in them, their strategic infrastructure. I remember when I was in Baghdad during the first Gulf War, we cataloged by virtue of where the hostages were, the hostages that Saddam Hussein had taken. We found out where they were, and those became the 54 strategic sites that we bombed during the first couple of nights of the first Gulf War. We figured that if Saddam thought enough of those sites to put American hostages there, they were probably of strategic importance to him and to his economy. I'm quite sure that anybody who takes a look at those documents with those sites will be putting together their own target list if they have the ability to do so.
Did his capacity to get access to these documents surprise you? You've been in the Foreign Service for, over 20 years. You had the rank of ambassador. Did it shock you that he was able to hack into the system, or that somebody leaked this volume of sensitive information to him?
Yeah, I'm awfully surprised that CIPRANet, which I suspect is the classified information program that he was involved in or using, I'm surprised that it wasn't better compartmentalized. That in fact, if in fact what we hear is true, that it's simply a couple of disgruntled soldiers, that they would have access to information so far outside their core responsibilities. So I'm awfully surprised at that. And I also just wonder how you end up an operation like this run essentially by a social misfit and a private first class in the U.S. Army. It does seem to me that, as others have said elsewhere, that one ought to be looking at the possibility that this is an official penetration by a hostile intelligence service, and begin to ask the question, who stands to benefit by this this embarrassment, as well as by this leak of some really essential information, national security information.
When you say that this may be a front, there may be something else more nefarious going on. Can you expand on that a little bit?
Well, I'm not in that business, so it's just speculation. But it does seem to me that when you're in the counterintelligence business, the first thing you look for is who's doing this and why. What do they have to gain by it? And I would hope that that's going on here. Perhaps they've already sorted it out, and they have concluded that it's just Mr. Assange and this private first-class Manning.
I want to turn to Iran for just a minute. Now they've revealed that they're mining their own yellow cake. What does that mean exactly, and how much closer does that bring them to the ability to weaponize, to have nuclear weapons?
Well, I think first of all it means that they obviously have some uranium deposits of some significance worthy of mining. That's not surprising. You have uranium in Canada, you have significant deposits in Niger, you have significant deposits in Iraq right across the border that they were trying to exploit before the first Gulf War. So that's not surprising. Yellow cake is really lightly refined uranium ore. It's just basically separating the uranium from the rock in which it comes.
But what it does is, I suppose, tell us that they are now independent. In other words, if they can both mine it, reduce it to yellow cake, and begin the enrichment process through the centrifuges that we know they have, what they're saying to the world is, you have been imposing sanctions on us, 4 different sets of sanctions, and you know what? It's not working. We now are independent and can move along this chain to get to enriched uranium sufficient for weaponization, and they're basically saying, keep on with the sanctions, we don't care.
Yeah, what they're saying is we have the raw material. Several years ago, when I was actually in Niger looking into this matter of uranium yellow cake sales, I was told and reported that the Iranians had made an approach to the Nigerians several years prior to my trip there. So that would have been maybe about a decade ago. So clearly in the intervening years, they've found their own deposits and are tapping into those. So they now have their raw material.
You have been at the center of trying to decipher what a nation's intent might be with respect to this enrichment process. How do you know, and how do you begin to look at a country like Iran and determine whether they are enriching for peaceful purposes, which is their claim, or whether they are enriching for military purpose, which is what, of course, the rest of the world believes?
I think operating or looking at the Iranian government as we do fairly closely, one has to operate on the assumption that they are in fact looking to build a nuclear weapon. I think all the signs or signals are there. Whether they want it as a deterrent or whether they want it as a hammer to hold over Israel and their Arab neighbors, as everybody fears. It's a fact that would be one of the consequences of a nuclear program that goes much further than this in the enrichment side of it.
Well, Ambassador, let's talk about your movie for a minute. The movie about you, that is, Fair Game, about you and your wife. I understand it was based on memoirs written by each of you. Of course, we all know that all movies take some license in making a story more interesting. Where do you feel the director took the most license with your story?
By and large, the movie is a reflection of the times we lived through. It's an accurate reflection of both of Valerie's work and of what I was doing and what we were trying to do to defend ourselves against this campaign that was run against us by the Bush administration and its allies.
Well, I assume you have read the editorial in the Washington Post. Mm-hmm. They rarely take a movie or review a movie as an editorial, but in this case they took exception to some of the facts in the movie. Specifically, in one scene that I found very compelling, your wife was portrayed as leading this rescue to ferry Iraqi scientists out of Iraq, and then after she was outed, that program was brought to a halt, according to the movie, but the Washington Post editorial says that was not factually true. Do you want to comment on that?
Well, I think the Washington Post and the reporters upon whom they based that particular judgment ought to go back and do some fact-checking. There's other reporting in the public domain that contradicts that, and in fact there is Special Prosecutor Fitzgerald unclassified summary which he submitted to the court in the trial of Scooter Libby, which says very specifically that not only was she employed by the CIA as an operations officer, she was in the Counterproliferations Division, where she serves as chief of the CPD component with responsibility for weapons proliferation issues related to Iraq. That puts her fair and square at the heart of our efforts to find the scientists and to determine whether or not there was an active WMD program going on in Iraq prior to the Second Gulf War.
All right. Well, thank you, Ambassador Joe Wilson, for a fascinating conversation.
Thank you very much. Nice to be with you.